Watchmen is a brand new HBO series created by Damon Lindelof that is a direct sequel to Alan Moore's classic graphic novel, not the 2009 movie by Zack Snyder. The series has nothing to do with that movie at all. Instead, this series is a direct sequel to the graphic novel set in an alternate 2019. Now, I know this series finished back in mid-December last year, and I should have really covered it when it properly finished, but unfortunately, a lot of things were going on at that time that meant I couldn't, and also I only have finished it within this last week or so. That being said, even though I am a little bit late to the party, I really wanted to talk about this show because I think it might be the best show I've seen in a long time, and I am not over-exaggerating. This show blew my fucking mind. When I sat down and watched the very first episode of this series, I kind of didn't know what I was getting myself in for. I really like the Zack Snyder movie, even though I'm aware of the things that it changed from the graphic novel and that there are some areas that it could be better in. I still really enjoy Zack Snyder's Watchmen. I think it's very visually interesting and has a few specific scenes that are absolutely fantastic. That being said, with the TV series, especially for the first couple of episodes, I didn't quite know what I was getting into or what the show was even going for. However, halfway through the series, things started to click into place, and I started to get what it was doing. I suddenly realised that this was instead a sequel to the graphic novel and not the movie, and then I started to understand what it was doing, so that by the end of the show, I was fully on board, and I loved every single choice that the show decided to make. And that is one thing I will say if you have not watched Watchmen. I won't get into spoilers, but if you have not seen the show and you have not read the original graphic novel by Alan Moore, then I highly recommend you read that first, or at least have a basic understanding of the events that happen in that graphic novel before you watch the show. The show does a decent job on its own of kind of filling you in on the bits you need to know from the graphic novel for the show to make sense, but just to get one up on yourself while watching the show, you're better off actually reading the graphic novel or just having the base knowledge of what happens in that comic. That way it will help you tons as you're watching the show. There are so many things I love about this show. The characters are all very interesting. Both the new characters that they set up for this show and the characters that they bring back from the original graphic novel. They are all very well acted and are all very interesting to watch in the show. And the way in which a lot of their character arcs play out and kind of fit into twists and turns in the narrative that you never see coming, I just thought was genuinely really incredible. The way that they kind of twist your expectations throughout this show is genuinely mind-blowing. There are some twists that happen as the story goes on that, like I said, I didn't see coming at all and blew my mind the more they happened. And it makes things from earlier in the series make a lot more sense. Because like I said, the first couple of episodes for me, I was a little bit confused, didn't quite know what was going on, but I wanted to stay with it to see where it would go. And by the end of the series, a lot of the things that confused you initially, it completely explains every single thing by the end. Even minute little details that you just kind of shrugged off at the start just for going, okay, I don't need to care about that thing anymore. And then by like episode 8, it will just be like, oh yeah, that little thing that you didn't really care about, that's kind of important. I also really like the fact that this show had balls and was not afraid to tackle very hard subject matters. The show, believe it or not, tackles a lot of race issues, as well as homophobia and a few other things that are, politically important right now. And I've heard a few people complain about the fact that it is very in your face in the show. I don't think that's the case. I think anytime the show focuses on a political topic, it is there entirely for the sake of the characters and the story. Specifically, all of this stuff regarding race violence. I mean, the show opens with the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921. And again, that is a thing that got a lot of complaints when that first episode aired, because a lot of people were like, is that really necessary? And you'll find out as the show goes on that this race violence is necessary for the story and the characters to help them grow and to make certain things make a lot more sense in the overall story of the show. And I thought it handled a lot of the harder topics very, very well, and kind of they do it in a way that kind of makes you reflect and think about things that happened previously in the series that you kind of think, not sure about that now that I'm thinking about it. But it also makes you reflect and kind of think, yeah, this kind of needs to be sorted out in real life. Watchmen is also a very visually stunning show as well, and I didn't really expect anything less because it's a HBO production, and you can tell they've put a lot of money and effort behind this show. And also, there is not a single shot I disagree with. Sometimes you can watch a movie or a TV show and there will be just a couple of shots that really don't need to be there. Like, they're just there for the sake of filling time or just for the sake of it looking nice. But this show, every single shot has a purpose. And the last time I watched a movie or a show that really focused on every single shot the way this show does, God, I can't really think about the last time I saw something that really paid a lot of attention to this kind of thing. Because like I said, there are a lot of times where a movie or a show might just linger on a shot that does not need to be there at all and is just there for padding. Also, the score. Oh my god, the score is amazing. Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross have outdone themselves here. If you've seen my video on my favourite movie soundtracks of all time, you will know that their score for Gone Girl is one of my favourites of all time. I genuinely think Watchmen might be the best score Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross have ever made. It's incredibly diverse. It is so unique to this show that I can't really compare it to anything else. And it's just fucking brilliant. I just, oh my god, if you have not listened to the soundtrack, or if you've not seen the show, then I highly recommend you at least give the soundtrack a go. The fact that they've released it on 3 separate volumes on Spotify just kind of shows you that they did not want to not include any specific track, because every single track is fucking great. And like I said a second ago, it's incredibly diverse, even though the majority of the soundtrack is heavy bass lines and synths and ambient noises that then get distorted and warped. Even though that is the majority of the soundtrack you're getting here, there is still a lot of experimentation and diversity for specific episodes in the series. For example, there's a fully piano-only cover of Life on Mars. There's this other track in the soundtrack that is using an old-timey piano, like from the 1930s or the 1920s. There's another track that entirely uses a gospel choir. You can tell that they really tried to broaden their range with this soundtrack, and it really shows, because it's incredibly diverse, but also just works in creating this really unsettling but also incredibly infectious tone that just kind of carries on throughout the entire show. And during some of the very dramatically driven moments in the later episodes, the score really comes into its own. Specifically, one moment in particular, if you've seen the show, I think you'll know what I'm on about. All I'm going to say is 1985 New York. That's all I'm going to say. The score really comes into its own in that moment particular, and I don't know, the music is just fucking brilliant. Now, as I was watching Watchmen, I wasn't sure whether they'd commissioned a season 2 or whether it was just its own thing. And after looking at a few articles, apparently Damon Lindelof's original intention was for this series just to be its own thing, to mirror the fact that it was kind of doing what the graphic novel was doing. The graphic novel is just a self-contained story in the book, and this series was trying to do something similar. It was just a self-contained story for one series. However, because this show has absolutely killed it ratings-wise, and people are wanting a season 2, Damon has kind of gone, okay, I could think about doing a second season, but I'll have to see. And this is where I really don't mind what they do with it. This one series works so well on its own as a self-contained story that I kind of don't want to see a season 2. But that being said, I would happily also see a season 2 if they did it under the right circumstances. If they just made a second series and just kind of half-assed it, then I would kind of lose all faith in the series and Damon Lindelof as a creator. But if they brought the show back under the right circumstances, and only if they had a story that was important enough to tell, then I would be happily on board with a season 2. But because everything wraps up so nicely in this one series, and just feels like its own complete thing, I kind of also think a second series is not needed, and would be very hard to do in the first place. So in that sense, I don't quite know which one they will do, or which one I want to happen. But for what it is at the moment, I think just this series as it is on its own is fantastic. And I'm going to give Watchmen a 10 out of 10. I somehow went through the whole of 2019 not giving a single new release a 10 out of 10. But now that we're in January 2020, I've given both 1917 and Watchmen 10 out of 10s, and they are both 2019 things. It doesn't make any sense, does it? If you enjoyed the video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Bye!